You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
Test, check 1, 2. You know you need unique New York. You know you need unique New York. Does that sound all right? Ah, that's better. You can always tell something's missing when you get isolated results, like AI that's only right for one of your systems. Get AI that can work across your data and applications. Learn more at IBM.com. The AI built for business. IBM.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caveat, N2K Cyberwire's privacy, surveillance, law, and policy podcast. I'm Dave Bittner, and joining me is my co-host, Ben Yellen from the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. Hey there, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
On today's show, Ben and I are joined by our special guest, Andrew Boyd, former director of the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence and currently an operating partner at AE Industrial Partners. While this show covers legal topics and Ben is a lawyer, the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. For official legal advice on any of the topics we cover, please contact your attorney. All right, Ben, let's jump right in here and welcome our guest, Andy Boyd. Andy, boy, it's a real treat to have you join us here today. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Dave and Ben. It's an honor to be on the show. I've been a long-time listener, and it's an honor for me as well.
Well, let's start off with your experience. Can you share with us, where did you get your start and what led you to where you are today?
Well, I got my start in northern New Jersey and then headed off to the Air Force Academy for college. And then after graduating from the Air Force Academy, spent 5 years in Air Force intelligence, migrated to the State Department, fell in love with the overseas experience and spent a decade in the field with the U.S. State Department, a variety of embassies across the Middle East. I learned Arabic. I'm a Middle East focused Foreign Service officer. And then a decade into my career in that arena, I went and joined the CIA, started working on real concrete counterterrorism issues, but eventually migrated into cyber operations, ultimately culminating at the end of my career, serving for almost 4 years as the director of CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence.
What is the primary mission that you had there as director of the Center for Cyber Intelligence with the CIA?
So what I like to say is CCI is the mission manager for all things cyber at CIA. That includes offensive cyber operations, intelligence collection, and strategic analysis, writing products on nation-state and non-nation state cyber threats for the Oval Office and what we call the President's Daily Brief, all the way down to specific analyses of cyber threats that probably would not be of interest to policymakers, but certainly would be of interest to threat hunters in the intelligence community, but also in the other parts of the U.S. government, DHS, CISA, and folks that are defenders of our networks.
So you, just based on your experience, I think you're well situated to answer this question. One of the things you told us before this interview is that there is a say-do gap in offensive cyber operations. Can you describe that a little bit? Because I think politicians in both parties, presidential administrations, say that they want to improve offensive cyber operations, and nobody really knows what that means in practice.
So yeah, this say-do gap. I think I stole that from some of my DoD friends who like that phrase. I mean, I take the new administration at their word. I mean, including John Ratcliffe, who's the director of CIA currently, who said that they want to expand offensive cyber operations against our adversaries. In this administration, there's been other administrations or other folks even the Biden administration who had said something similar, but they didn't really know what they wanted to do per se with those tools. And so that's where the say-do gap comes in. I think in part, it comes from not really understanding what cyber tools can do and what they can't do. We use our cyber tools in the intelligence community and in cyber command across the government to collect information, to collect intelligence, but also under very specific authorities from the White House. to disrupt or in some cases destroy networks that are of our adversaries where we see a threat. I do tend to point to folks who say, after the Volt Typhoon experience of wanting to do the exact same thing to the People's Republic of China, I tend to think that people are not really evaluating how the cyber tools work and how that might not be practical. I also tend to point to February 2022 when we thought the Russians were going to do extensive cyber attacks against the Ukraine during the invasion, and that really didn't come to fruition with the exception of an attack against a satellite network that was providing some communications infrastructure for the Ukrainians. So cyber operations are hard to plan, they're hard to get right, and they have to be nested in a broader strategic policy, a broader national security strategy, and I just have not seen that yet come to fruition.
As Ben sort of alluded to, I think offensive cyber is sometimes a fuzzy term, sometimes a loaded term. I would love to hear how you define it and how you think it's different from cyber defense or active defense.
I mean, I tend to define offensive cyber as two things: information intelligence collection on one side of it, which frankly, not just the United States, but a number of nations with capabilities do that. And then on the other side, the destructive and or disruptive attacks using cyber tools to bring down networks. Now, there are some who consider cyber warfare to be in a completely separate domain of warfare, like the Army and the Marines on the ground, the Air Force and naval aviation in the air, Space Force, using space as a military domain. In my opinion, offensive cyber is a supporting activity, not unlike electronic warfare, to support whatever the strategic goal is of a military activity. Again, separate from my point on information collection, intelligence collection. Now, if you have a well thought out strategy, cyber attacks against a military adversary's communications grids, things like that can be, quite helpful. But on its own, as a standalone discipline, I don't tend to think that it's very helpful.
Just for example, as we're recording this, tensions have erupted between Israel and Iran, and there's been discussion of U.S. involvement. And I think certainly a reticence to send active U.S. service members into the region for this type of conflict. Do you foresee some point down the line where our entire involvement in a conflict like this, even just supporting an ally, whether that's Israel or a NATO ally, is going to be through our expertise in offensive cyber operations?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the conflict between Israel and Iran is proving that kinetic military activity, for lack of a better term, it is what wins wars. Again, there is some indication that there's been some cyber activity on the Israeli side onto Iran. Again, I think against a bank that was associated with the IRGC in Iran. That is a supporting element to the broader military operation. I think the same can be said in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Looking at it, 3 years hence, cyber activity supported in a very small way the Russian offensive against the Ukraine, and the Ukrainians, similarly use cyber means information collection, but also disruptive and destructive attacks as a supporting element. If, in fact, the United States decides to use only cyber tools against Iran, and I'm not saying that this is even in the offing, that would really, in my opinion, and this is not a judgment on any administration, it's just what I've experienced over my career, that would really just be a sort of crutch to indicate they were doing something, because there is no concrete way to affect what's happening between Israel and Iran in comparison to the air dominance that the Israelis have and the attacks that they've done on the leadership infrastructure in Iran. Now, I would caveat that by saying, if given enough time to plan, and given enough targeting information, if a nation state did not want to go into full military conflict, you can affect change and destroy whatever component of that government's military capabilities are. But again, it's usually a temporary thing because, as you both know, nation states can recover quite quickly from cyber attacks.
I guess you think of Stuxnet, right? Of being able to damage
Yeah,
their nuclear capabilities.
There's been a lot of open source reporting on that. One of my friends, Kim Zetter, wrote "Countdown to Zero Day," a fantastic rendition of that. I'm not going to confirm or deny any U.S. government involvement in that operation, but I would point to that as an example of an operation that worked, that was well planned, but again was a temporary setback and during an epoch where we didn't want direct war with the Iranians.
Mm.
Do you think that this is a categorical limitation? Like, there's never going to be a point where our primary warfighting capability is in the cyber realm? Or do you think this is a current technological limitation? Like, we just don't have the tools to effectuate the goals the way we do with a kinetic military attack?
I think the cyber attacks may increase in intensity. The three variables: speed, intensity, control, in my opinion, drive how cyber operations work. You can't have it fast, intense, and under the control of the operator all at the same time, and that
Right.
makes cyber operations extraordinarily difficult. But again, as we've learned from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there's a lot of old school components of modern warfare: artillery, tank battles, etc. There's a lot of new school, so to speak, aspects of warfare as well. I mean, autonomous drones. I mean, the Ukrainians have basically proven that the rest of the world is way behind them on how to use autonomous drones and whatnot. That being said, pure cyber attacks, I cannot picture being a primary element of warfare, because at the end of the day, you're not destroying on a permanent basis an adversary's warfighting capability.
And now a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud. Identity is the new battleground, and attackers are exploiting stolen identities to infiltrate your organization. Traditional defenses can't keep up. SpyCloud's holistic identity threat protection helps security teams uncover and automatically remediate hidden exposures across your users, from breaches, malware, and phishing to neutralize identity-based threats like account takeover, fraud, and ransomware. Don't let invisible threats compromise your business. Get your free corporate darknet exposure report at spycloud.com/cyberwire and see what attackers already know. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. Andy, what do you see as the boundaries or ethical red lines for offensive cyber?
So I would suspect Ben, as an attorney, may be better equipped to answer that, but I will give give my opinion on that.
As an attorney, I'd just like to say I have no ethics. So
Okay,
just kidding.
I mean, again, there's some sort of mystery and magic applied to cyber that has always sort of mystified me, frankly. When it's really just another tool for intelligence collection, or again, disruptive or destructive activity, not unlike electronic warfare or any other inventions that we've had over the years. It's just that a lot of people, again, going back to our policy discussion, don't understand how it works. But handsets, our phones, our iPhones, Android phones, endpoints on laptops, small office home routers, all the endpoints you can think of. That's where the information is. So that is why offensive cyber is such an important thing for intelligence collection, but also for other sorts of operations. That in and of itself doesn't make it particularly unique. It's just unique in that that's where we are in 2025, as opposed to where we were 20 years ago, where offensive cyber vectors weren't quite what they are today.
Do you think policymakers themselves are up to speed on cyber capabilities and how offensive cyber is actually used?
I think there are some. I think there are some, both in the Senate and the House, and in the executive branch, who are very cognizant of it. I mean, obviously, there's professional, permanent, non-political staff at the intelligence community and out at DHS, CISA, and elsewhere who are very, very cognizant of all of it. And even some folks currently at the NSC and the White House who've been in this arena before. But I think writ large, I don't think we've really settled on what our strategic intent in cyber is currently, and how that's going to nest into our broader national security strategy. Again, and this is a very open debate in academia. In fact, I taught a course for a couple semesters at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in the Al Perovich Institute on cyber policy and cyber strategy. And the whole thesis of the course was, what is our strategy? And I posited to the students that we didn't really have one, that we had a lot of ideas, because I don't think we've really settled on the big part of that grand strategy debate is whether or not our cyber tools are a war-fighting domain in and of themselves, or is it a supporting fire?
Huh. Yeah, it's been my perception that leadership up to and including presidents are reticent to draw red lines in the sand when it comes to cyber, and you can understand why that may be, but it seems to me like there's intentional fuzziness there, like maybe to not hold back capabilities or perhaps not even reveal capabilities. Do you think there's anything to that line of thinking?
Well, I mean, I also don't think that debate is settled yet either. I mean, there are some in the previous administration that believe that a disruptive or destructive cyber attack inside Russia post Russian invasion of Ukraine, that would be considered an act of war because the activity was happening on boxes inside of Russia. There was a whole another group of folks in the previous administration who argued that was not the case. If no one was going to be injured, that would not be an act of war. And I really do not think we've resolved that debate. And I think you all are familiar with the Cyber Solarium Commission, where a lot of these discussions, and that kind of grew into the founding of the Office of the National Cyber Director. A lot of these ideas were discussed in there, and frankly, the naming of the Cyber Solarium Commission, linking it to the discussion in the 1950s about the appropriate deterrent capability of nuclear weapons. I just, the conclusion of that, I think, despite all the effort Mark Montgomery and others put into that, is inconclusive. And I think, frankly, with the legislative branch and the executive branch, we need a behind closed door discussion on that strategy, and then a very open discussion, including academia, as to where we want to go. Not unlike what we did in the 1950s on the discussion of our deterrent strategy back then.
You are now back in the private sector. What role do you think the private sector can play in all of this as advisors to the government, as a way to enhance capabilities? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, thanks for asking, Ben. Yes, I think the private sector plays an enormous role. They're both on the defensive and the offensive side. I mean, on the defensive side, the 90% or more, I can't put a hard number on it, but the infrastructure is owned by the private sector, be it our telecommunications networks who were victims of Salt Typhoon, be it all 16 critical infrastructure sectors, oil and gas, transportation, and whatnot. Even our medical system and our education system are vulnerable to nation state and non-nation state cyber threats. The private sector has to be deeply involved in defending those networks, and I think we're way behind the curve on that. On the offensive side, we have a number of companies that do vulnerability research, and under appropriate authorities of the federal government or state and local law enforcement. provide that vulnerability research, and then what we would call exploit development to do legal activity, be it under DoD Title 10 authorities, intelligence community Title 50 authorities, or under law enforcement authorities. And the U.S. government doesn't have the capacity to be doing that vulnerability research on their own. And frankly, if the private sector is not deeply involved in that, we would be behind the power curve. What I always cite is that the People's Republic of China has hundreds of thousands of folks in their intelligence service and their military involved in offensive cyber operations. A sizable portion of those are actually in private sector companies where they may be fully working for the Chinese government, or they may just be moonlighting. American companies are going to follow very different and stricter ethical rules on that. Back to to Dave's ethics question, but the federal government, state and local governments absolutely need the U.S. private sector to be involved in all of that.
Well, when we're talking about public-private collaboration, what sort of safeguards do you think should be in place to manage risks when these private entities engage in offensive capabilities?
Well, in the Biden administration, there was an executive order written, unfortunately named the spyware EO, which I just think is an unfortunate naming convention. And I think that's going to be tweaked a little bit, but in large part, the current administration is keeping that because it does add sort of left and right limits on the appropriate use of those tools and what sort of collaboration the U.S. government and others can have, with foreign offensive cyber entities. Similarly, in the Defense Authorization Act of last year, similar limits were placed in there for DoD entities involved in offensive cyber. I think a lot of that was driven by the debacle of the NSO group and their Pegasus tool, and how Citizen Lab did a report on that. Everybody points to how Jamal Khashoggi met his demise due to the Pegasus tool being on his handset. The spyware EO lays out how that will not happen again if there's companies that are cooperating with the U.S. government, and I think by and large companies that are taken seriously adhere borderline in a religious fashion to that EO and any associated documents from defense legislation.
And now, a word from our sponsor, ThreatLocker. Keeping your system secure shouldn't mean constantly reacting to threats. ThreatLocker helps you take a different approach by giving you full control over what software can run in your environment. If it's not approved, it doesn't run. Simple as that. It's a way to stop ransomware and other attacks before they start, without adding extra complexity to your day. See how ThreatLocker can help you lock down your environment at www.threatlocker.com. Where do you think we're headed here? Are there changes that you would like to see made when it comes to policy, talent, the technology, or even the mindset to better serve our nation as we go forward with offensive cyber?
So in the short term, I would really hope that we slow down the discussion on separating the dual hat, the leadership of NSA and leadership of Cyber Command, currently under the leadership of the same person. I do not think, if we want to head down the path of expanding offensive cyber operations, separating the NSA leadership from the Cyber Command leadership or at the same time probably would not be a great idea. But I also, what I'd like to see in the medium term is a broader public debate about the appropriate use of our cyber tools and where we want Cyber Command and the rest of our cyber tools to fit into our national security strategy. I just think we're in a fairly vague place on that currently. And in the long term, you make reference to talent. we do have to have a national discussion about how we recruit people into the cyber domain. Mark Montgomery has again, back to the Cyber Solarium Commission, has recommended standing up a cyber force and changing how we recruit people into the military. He's frequently cited we shouldn't focus on physical fitness. We should focus on computer science and engineering capabilities. I don't know if that is the answer. I don't think standing up a cyber force is necessarily the right short-term answer, but we do have to have a serious discussion on how we hire and retain people with those sorts of skills, hard engineering skills, hard computer science skills into Cyber Command, into NSA, into the technical components of CIA, and on the defensive side into DHS, CISA, and FBI cyber. We have not had a national discussion on that. Other countries have, and I think we're behind on that. I think the future of our capabilities is dependent on ensuring that our young people are tracked into important jobs like that, and they don't all end up directly into the private sector. Hopefully, they can spend at least post college or into their 30s supporting the defense of the United States.
Do you worry about any of the cuts over the past few months to organizations like CISA or some of our perhaps strained relationships like with Five Eyes Intelligence? Do you think has had an impact, is going to have an impact? Is that something you're worried about, or does it not really change your perspective either way?
I'll start with the second one. I'm not concerned per se about our Five Eyes relationships. Those will chug along as they have for years, managed by the intelligence community. I mean, obviously, other components of DoD, but in the intelligence community context, I'm fairly confident that those relationships will continue and the collaboration on operations and analysis will continue. I am concerned but hopeful that CISA, CISA has shed a couple of their missions, some of the countering disinformation stuff, which frankly, that's okay. I am concerned though that they're cutting into bone when it comes to cyber defense, and I look forward to Sean Planky getting confirmed by the Senate and taking over the leadership reins at CISA, so that we can have a more public discussion as to where we're going. But CISA has frankly lost a great deal of talent over the past few months.
Andy, what advice would you give to the next generation of cyber leaders who are navigating this evolving offensive cyber landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think luckily it didn't just evolve overnight. I mean, we've sort of watched this progress, and frankly, I always I point to where Cyber Command was born, a decade and a half ago, and really had a hard time standing up and getting the appropriate people to work. Now, I don't think they're ready yet for the divorce of the dual hat from NSA, but I think they're miles ahead of where they used to be. I mean, frankly, I spent a lot of time a decade ago just trying to prevent Cyber Command from breaking things that were important to the intelligence community. Now it's a much more collaborative environment, and the leadership at Cyber Command is frankly second to none. I think the next generation of leaders, people who work for me, are going to continue on that path of understanding, where the threat is. People always say or people in the agency and outside of the cyber realm in the Pentagon always said, cyber is the future. Well, cyber is the now, and cyber was the past. You all are just catching up. And I think our leaders, and again, I do worry about retaining talent in the intelligence community. We are losing some folks to the voluntary early retirement program that has sort of been in effect since the new administration came in. But I think, I will take a step back, 5 years from now, and I think we'll have a very healthy cyber leadership in the intelligence community, DoD, FBI, and CISA. And I think the people we have coming up are very talented. They just have to keep that flow of talent coming in.
Before I let you go, can you tell us what you're up to these days? Yeah, I know you're an operating partner with AE Industrial Partners. What's your day-to-day like?
So my day-to-day as an operating partner at AE is continuing to manage their national security portfolio. They have a couple of cyber companies, Red Lattice and Case, on which I'm on the board, and then looking for potential opportunities to bring other companies at the nexus of national security and technology that are obviously good investments for AE, but are heading in a direction that is relevant to the future of our national security. It's obviously a very different domain than where I was until before I retired in October 2023. But I do consider private equity companies like AE and a whole variety of other private sector companies to be directly involved in mission and in the defense of the United States, and that's a very exciting place for me to be.
Andrew Boyd is former director of the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence. He's currently an operating partner at AE Industrial Partners. Andy, thank you so much for taking the time for us today.
Thank you, David, Ben. It's been great.
Thanks for coming on.
Hey everybody, Dave here. I've talked about Delete Me before, and I'm still using it because it still works. It's been a few months now, and I'm just as impressed today as I was when I signed up. Delete Me keeps finding and removing my personal information from data broker sites, and they keep me updated with detailed reports, so I know exactly what's been taken down. I'm genuinely relieved knowing my privacy isn't something I have to worry about every day. The Delete Me team handles everything. It's the set it and forget it peace of mind. And it's not just for individuals. Delete Me also offers solutions for businesses, helping companies protect their employees' personal information and reduce exposure to social engineering and phishing threats. And right now, our listeners get a special deal, 20% off your Delete Me plan. Just go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and use promo code N2K at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/N2K, code N2K. And that is Caveat, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. We'd love to hear from you. We're conducting our annual audience survey to learn more about our listeners. We're collecting your insights through the end of this summer. There's a link in the show notes. We hope you'll check it out. This episode was produced by Liz Stokes. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben. The show is mixed by Trey Hester. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Ben Yellen.
Thanks for listening.